This time of year, mid-autumn, there's probably got to be about the best time of year for landscape photography. The trees are full of colour and sunrise is at a more convivial hour. And in this video I'm doing something a bit different from my previous videos in that, as you can see, I'm actually outside and I'm going to be taking some photos. I've come down to one of my local woods in order to try and capture some of that colour, and I thought I'd bring you along to see what we can find. So stick around. Now then, good to be with you all again, and yeah, I'm in the woods. And up until about 2 years ago, I'd never really done any woodland photography, well, any serious woodland photography. And since then, I found it to be probably one of the most enjoyable, but at the same time, most challenging genres of photography. It's enjoyable because you can come into the woods at virtually any time. You're not necessarily chasing the epic light that landscape photographers often chase. In fact, the best time to come into the woods are probably when the conditions aren't so great, when it's overcast, when there's diffused lighting, or even when there's mist or rain. But it can be challenging because despite all this potential subject matter, it can be very difficult at times to find a decent composition. And that's because the woods are full of clutter. There's other trees, there's branches, there's twigs, there's ferns, all of which might just get in the way of the shot that you're trying to shoot. And so you have to work very hard in order to see and get the ideal viewpoint. And quite often it can be literally a case of not being able to see the tree for the woods. So let's see what we can get today. So I found this old broken silver birch, I think, which looks quite interesting. It's got a bit of an inverted V. There's some interesting colour behind the tree, and so yeah, I'm going to see what I can get from this. As you can see, we've got another tree on the right hand side, and I'm not sure that I actually want that in my shot at this time. I think I want to concentrate on the simplicity of just the broken tree itself, so I might end up shooting this with a longer focal length. One of the things to consider when you're shooting in the woods is a polarizer filter, and that's because the leaves can reflect highlights, especially when they're damp, and a polarizer will also boost the saturation slightly. And with the polarizer on, as I turn it, you can see that it affects the highlights of the image and also the saturation, especially on the ferns in the foreground. Now, as with any landscape photography, you have to consider the placement of your sky. And with woodland photography, you've got the option to exclude it altogether. And you have to remember that the eye is drawn to the brighter parts of the scene when you look at an image. And so often it can be preferable, desirable, to actually bring your composition down below the skyline and just focus on the details. Now, it's easy in this instance in that the tree actually falls below the skyline, but I have got some bits of sky peeking through the trees, which I might have to decide whether to do something about that in post-production. We'll see. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that the woodland is full of clutter, and you therefore need to examine your scene very closely to ensure that none of it is encroaching into the shot that might spoil it. And it's not just a case of examining your edges and foreground, you also need to examine the background. And as we can see in this particular shot, there's a tree slap bang in the middle between the main trunk and the broken arm of the tree that I'm trying to shoot. But just by moving ever so slightly, a few inches to the right, we can hide that offending tree completely. Now, had we not seen it, we could have maybe eradicated it in post-production, but you'll save yourself a whole host of time if you can spot these things in advance. Okay, so that's the composition now finalised. I'm shooting with the 85mm 1.8 lens, but I'm at f4. I'm using f4 because I want to have a shallower depth of field. Even though we've moved the camera slightly to get rid of some of the clutter, the shallower depth of field will help a little bit more to remove some of that busyness in the background. The 85mm gets rid of some of the peripheral clutter, so I'm just focusing directly on the subject. I'm focused directly on the tree, 100 ISO, an eighth of a second. So let's see. Yeah, that's not bad. And whilst you're looking at this image, I'll pack away and see if I can find myself another location. See you soon. As you walk around the woods, you'll find all sorts of potentially interesting subject matter. But an interesting subject on its own won't always make for an interesting image. You also need to have the lighting conditions suitable for that image. For example, this old tree, which I've photographed many times, is extremely interesting with its tentacle-like branches reaching out like a sea monster. But a composition for this subject, in my mind, works better when the lighting is more moody, such as when it's misty, rather than the brighter conditions we have today. So I think I'll pass on this one for now and see what else there is to be had. So I've been working on another composition now, and this old gnarly tree, and at first I was a little bit further to the left, and there's some trees in the background which the light was catching, which looked quite interesting, but in the end I think it was just a bit of a distraction. So moving just slightly to the right, only by about a couple of foot, I've hidden those trees more or less behind the main subject, shooting at f4, and that'll put the background more out of focus, so the concentration will primarily be on the main subject. Okay, so let's see what we've got. Yep, job's a good one. Quite happy with that. Well, I think I'm going to call it a day there now, certainly with regards to the video. But I am going to continue scouting through the woods, looking for other potential locations. Now, obviously, you're going to find compositions whilst you're out doing your photo shoot, but you improve your chances no end if you've already got some in your back pocket. That way, when the conditions are more to your liking, maybe when it's misty, you can come into the woods and go straight to those spots, saving yourself a whole host of time. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this video, dealing with compositions in the woods can sometimes be challenging because of the clutter. And one of the most important things you can do is to check your scene. Check it visually without the camera, but also use your viewfinder and the rear screen and zoom in if you can. And if there is any extraneous clutter, we've seen that by just moving your camera slightly can minimise or get rid of it completely. Also, using longer focal lengths can help minimise some of the extraneous peripheral clutter, and using shallower depths of field will help minimise some of the background clutter. Well, I hope that's been of use to some of you. Bit different from my other videos, as I said earlier, in that I'm outside on location. And I do intend to do some more of these videos, but I'm not quite sure what the subject matter will be yet. However, my next video is probably going to be a review of another camera bag. In my last video, I was looking at the Mindshift bags, and I said then that I was still hunting for my ideal bag. Well, I've got another bag on order, which will be with me soon, and I'll be doing a review of that bag. Whether it'll be my ideal, well, we'll just have to wait and see. And if you want to find out what that bag is, you'll have to tune in next time. Until then, thank you ever so much for watching. Take care, look after yourself, stay safe. TTFN, ta-ta for now.